So what I'm going to do now is just to get going with the questions. I'll put 1 or 2 to each speaker and then hand over to all of you. We have 100 million questions about this very hot topic of critical raw materials. How clean are they really? How toxic are they really in all sorts of different ways? Many of them are polemical. And then we shall also get some questions from our expert panel here. So first off, I wonder if I could start off with our 2 economists. Arild, I was wondering what your thoughts are about how one can get over this issue of the first mover problem that you identified. How do we make sure that all the participants in the SAG race are ready and understand the rules of the game and that it's a fair game, basically? I think that's what you were saying. Is it the role of governments? Is it the role of industries to do this somehow? In a cross-industry sort of way? What are your thoughts about actually breaking the logjam?
One of the really interesting things about studying this is that this is really, really different from what we know from technological innovation historically. Because then the rule of the game has always been that it's the innovators, the startups that is challenging the incumbents in order to do something. But what we observe in this type of transitions is that it's actually the big, old, grand companies that is leading the way. So a lot of that responsibility actually lies with the incumbents in order to make this in time. That said, I also think that, and I tried to say a few things about it, but I also think that regulations are extremely important. Some of the regulations that we have, they are designed for a linear economic system, and it's actually working against circularity. And I think that there are some initiatives that we have, such as in Norway, we have this green platform that so at least the Norwegians know about it, which is designed to get small and big companies together in order to create these types of solutions.
I was about to put a question to you from Oscar Alexander Estensen, which is, if large actors are needed to drive the change to the circular economy, how do we stop smaller actors from falling behind? So is this one of the measures?
Yes. So this is kind of the challenge, that we need to link up these small companies. And if you count them, there are 96% SMEs in Norway and 4% big ones. So a lot of the issue here is to get the smaller actors on board the train.
So Ode, what are the public policy implications of your work? And what is it that policy needs to incorporate to make sure that you anticipate that circular systems are going to have to be brought in? Because so far it hasn't been knitted in from the beginning, has it?
Yeah, so there are 2 levels of answers. The first one is that now I think policies start taking into account this issue of critical raw materials. That's first. Then regarding recycling, and so recycling is a way to ensure that there is some independence or autonomy when it comes to the supply. And it's not sure whether it's really the role of the government or the role of the industry. I mean, there is a room for policy if you have a market failure. And it may be the case if you have a lack of information that can be linked, for instance, with geopolitical issues. But I mean, on the whole, you have to... So
you're saying there should be enough market incentive anyway for the industry to do it?
Yeah, but there is some. I mean, we already see that there has been some tension, for instance, on the market for lithium, cobalt, copper, and I think nickel. So there was some rise in the price. There was some reaction of the industry. I mean, that's a very good trigger and, I mean, a nice reason for the industry to react, and they do. And this is a good incentive also to do some recycling. So there is a rule for, I mean, a room for regulation when you have some externalities or market failure. And I think you have that in the question. One big issue, if you start mining more, for instance, to increase the supply of these raw materials, all depends on the condition it is done. So we have to go deeper and deeper in new places, and I guess Norway is concerned with the fact that we may look for things in the sea, for instance. And here, I mean, when you have such externality that are involved, then there is a rule for regulation, there is a rule for policy.
Indeed. I'd just like to ask now Jana and Stefan, please, for their views on some of the challenges in actually doing this in a cost-effective way and getting sufficient material out of the process. So first I wanted to ask you, Jana, about what you were saying about the batteries. How much are you getting out of the lithium-ion batteries? How long can you extend their life? Can you tell us about some of the challenges in the battery recycle scheme that you've set up?
Well, first of all, Anisha, allow, if I may, I just want to add one comment regarding the discussion before. On the political side, in my point of view, a big point can be to talk about and to make sure that the methodology is the same for everyone, you know, so the methodology of accounting, methodology of the way how we do what is right, what is wrong, that we can compare the measures that we take. Also cross-sector. So it's not only automotive, it's a cross-sector. Things like mass balancing, stuff like that. So this is, there you have a methodology point where we can have better comparability if we would do on the same method. So sorry, that just as an addition. So regarding the batteries, we do see that the battery itself longs for the automotive issue. If you treat it right, has a quite long-lasting point. So we have no issues about the kilometer range in the lifetime. Respectively to the combustion engines. That's as a first step. So it's a lifetime where we can say that's okay. So far we figured out. And then of course we in the first batteries we used for the automotive, there were different raw materials inside. So we changed already the technology in the portion that we used for cobalt, for lithium, for nickel, and there's a technology running up in the technology in that direction that you try to use, of course, less critical raw materials in the end. So if we recycle our first batteries, we can have and do it right. And you saw the recovery rates that we can already have. Here in this new methodologies for recycling, then
so
you can, of course, put that into
Sorry
the
to interrupt,
new
Jana.
numbers.
Give me some numbers. To what extent have you managed to reduce the dependence on some of these critical raw materials?
Well, not yet. I do not have yet big numbers because the batteries are still in the field. So we do expect within the next 10 years to have the really, bigger portions coming back for recycling. But so far they are running in the field. And then you can see, okay, how is the dependency, not at all in the end for the material itself.
Okay. So Stefan, I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about the aluminium recycling project that Fraunhofer has been involved in. I was looking at the website and I was very intrigued by one of the projects in particular, I hope you're across it, which is to do with the packaging for medicines, which is aluminium and plastic and all mixed up really, and really quite difficult to extract. But I think you've made some strides in that direction.
Yeah, definitely. So for me, the aluminum is an example that the lemon is not yet squeezed out even in Europe. Yeah, this was a very good example from the European industry, which shows that, for example, closed loop economy on the level of aluminum sheet, which is used in outdoor applications in car industry and therefore requiring very high qualities of primary material, that there is still the possibility to increase also the amount of circular content up to 100%. But of course, it means you have to change a lot of things. You have to change, for example, sorting technology in your production sites, and you also have to change the supplier contracts, because what you need then is a direct contract between the OEM and the supplier, because then the supplier takes back his material. One very good example. And another aspect which I would like to raise, addressing the statement from my colleague from Mercedes-Benz, because she said that a harmonized methodology is also of utmost importance. And this is something I would like to underline with a very easy example. Currently, legislation in car industry is looking only on the tailpipe side, and all measures done, for example, in the supply chain, for example, like using secondary materials, which also contributes to lower carbon footprinting, like, for example, the carbon footprint of battery production. If we use now a recycled material for the battery production, this is not accounted on a legal basis. And therefore, Fraunhofer is currently also working on a big European-funded research project to change exactly that methodology, so to open the space that if I take, for example, recycled circular product, and my colleague from Mercedes-Benz mentioned, for example, mass balance approaches, etc., are harmonized on a methodology point of view, then that it can be also accounted in the legal aspect, and then a non-business case directly comes to a business case. Why? Because currently, if you are doing some investment in the supply chain, it's nice, but it will not help you to achieve the legal target. If we change now the rules that you can account these things, it will help also industry and therefore change a non-business case to a business case. And therefore, this is really of utmost importance to work also on that legal aspect combined with a harmonized methodology.
Great, thanks very much, Stefan. So Maria, Norway's playing catch-up in this field, which is an unusual place to be in, possibly for the country, but also a good place to be in because there are other examples, other countries that have made more progress. So who do you see as the key players? Which are the better models that you aspire to, and what can Norway learn from that process?
Well, I think that there is probably not only one model which is the best. We need to focus on creating different models and see how those can coexist. But if I was to choose one model, the circular policies of the European Union and the strategies developed there, it's really inspiring, and it's really showing how increased focus on decoupling of economic growth from growth in waste is a good business opportunity, and that's something which from the Norwegian government's perspective is important to stay closely connected to.
Thank you. The elephant in the room, dear friends and colleagues, is that a number of people feel that critical raw materials, some of them at least, are toxic in themselves because of the way in which they're extracted, because of the regimes from which they come. And so I want to put to you a kind of amalgam of many questions that have come in over here, many of which have been upvoted several times, which is really about what is the responsibility of the car industry, of the manufacturing industry generally, in terms of using critical raw materials like cobalt, like lithium, and how do you deal with the fact that it's not simply an economic driver here in this discussion and debate? Who would like to take that first? Aude.
I can start maybe. So in France, this is a very accurate problem because this is really considering whether we should open new lithium mines, for instance. And we see that, of course, there is disagreement. At the level of the country, it seems like a good idea to be less dependent from other countries, and maybe also because we have better technologies to do that in a cleaner way than in some other places. But of course, you see that it goes towards, different interests of the people that are going to be living close to the mine, and that would, not like that much. So we are actually thinking, so I'm leading a project on critical raw materials, and we are trying to define some sort of shadow value of the critical raw materials. So not that far from the carbon value in some way. And you would tell me, okay, but for these critical materials, we have a market price. We don't have, we have only an artificial one for carbon. But the point is that there are a lot of externalities that are not inside. So all the consequences for people, for biodiversity, all the effects through the geopolicy as well. I mean, all these, we think, are elements that should be part of a value of each critical raw material so that we have a value for France, for lithium, that would represent not only the market price, but all the other externalities that are also there.
Oh, very interesting. Thank you. Arnold.
Yeah, it's car manufacturers and shipbuilders and all these companies that are predominantly driven by their customers. So it's also a responsibility for us consumers to accept that some of our new stuff is actually based on recycled materials or things like that. And we worked with maritime equipment, for example, and just to say that you put an old engine or an old thruster or any other type of equipment that has been used before, but you know that the quality is world class, it's just simply not acceptable when you're selling a new ship. And that is not necessarily only the responsibility of the manufacturer, but it's also the responsibility of the buyer to take that responsibility.
The end user. Yeah. So, Jana, can I put the question to you, really, which is it's a kind of an amalgam of many questions that have come in here, which is that how can you call moving into e-vehicles, for instance, and green mobility clean when so many of the critical raw materials that go into it are toxic, in inverted commas?
Well, of course, we need to make sure that we use the right material and that we use that material that is necessary, right? And we need to have. I mean, if you look to our supply chain, it's a very complex supply chain. We have a high five-digit number of direct suppliers, and each supplier again has its supply chain itself. So you need to have a risk analysis here, due diligences in supply chain, and you need to have standards special for the mines, and then you can, contract the supplier that you get out the raw material of the standard that the mine is following, right? And then, of course, we again, I mentioned that we scroll down the supply chain, that we in the end really for the most important materials, for the critical raw materials, we do know where the material is coming from. So that's for one. And then you asked me about the customer and that customer behavior. I think the customer behavior and the change going from the combustion engine to the BEV engine is something that we can, make with technology, that we can make with Inspire. We want to have really inspired cars, fully digitalized cars. And it, of course, comes with the technology and the, charging infrastructure itself. So the customer convenience itself during the charging, then enough charging points are there, then you can have the change. Because the technology is there, we do have great energy efficiency factors already in, and with the materials, we have measures in place that we use the right ones and that we, also decouple our volume growth from the resource consumption.
Thank you, Jana. A question for the State Secretary Maria from Ralph Rahman. How do you think industrial clusters and the concept of industrial symbiosis could contribute to improve Norway's performance in terms of the circular economy?
Well, I think they can contribute greatly, not least to reduce the number of resources which is currently being wasted, lost, or is unable to be put into a circular system. Because clusters, especially those clusters within markets such as the European one, they're constantly looking for new opportunities within the developing low emission, low environmental footprint businesses and markets. So they truly have an important role to play. And also let me just add that it's important to, from the governmental perspective, to incentivize increased reuse. And just I want to challenge everyone to think about: do you have a phone which you're no longer using, which is somewhere in a drawer, which could be recycled? Well, probably yes. I think I have one myself. So it's all about the symbiosis of how to reuse the resources we already have in a smart way, so it makes sense for the ecology and the economy.
And to be nudged into doing that,
Exactly.
wouldn't you say that?
Yes.
You know, God knows how many devices I have locked away in some cobwebby drawer, but someone needs to remind me to do it and make it easy and all the rest of it. Yeah. I have a question. Thank you, Marie. We have a question here for you, Stefan. I don't completely understand the question, so I hope you do. And it's from Christian West, which is, what do you think about pyrolysis as a solution to the plastic waste problem in the world? Today, about 80% of all plastic is mismanaged, landfilled, or burned.
Of course, I understand the question, and I like it.
Good. I was hoping that you would.
Yeah, definitely. Pyrolysis is a good point to address the problem, because currently we have what we call mechanical recycling for polymers, but the potential there is somehow limited. And therefore also, and this has something to do with research, therefore we also work together with chemical industry in our research campus to do exactly that, to do pyrolysis oil out of old used plastics, for example, plastics from the ocean, to pyrolyze that, to produce the pyrolyzed oil, to give that back to chemical industry, which are doing then, again, polymers out of it, which can be used in high-quality applications like in cars, in aerospace, and other things. This is what we are doing.
Can I just interrupt there? So I don't understand the chemistry, but the price of these products, how did they compare with sort of virgin products, as it were? Is there a big price differential, and how do you address that?
Great question. I really like it. Of course, it's more expensive currently than conventional primary material. But now I do that linkage to what I said before, because if the price is higher, but if I can account also the CO2 reduction I have with these circular products, and if I can account these CO2 reduction in a legal frame for tailpipe emissions, then this is a business case. Yeah. So the story short is, yes, it is more expensive, but if we change the rules for legislation, where we have to pay much higher prices for the same amount of reduced ton CO2, then this comes a business case. And therefore, I showed you also these things. Remain what I've shown. The CO2, 1 ton CO2 on the tailpipe side costs 800 till 1,600 euro per ton CO2. And if I do some measures in the circularity area, like, for example, what you asked before, pyrolysis oil and then producing new polymers, I pay maybe a few hundred, 200, 300, 400 euro per ton CO2. But this is still more cheaper than the tailpipe thing. And if I get this accounted, everything works.
Okay, great. So that was very clear. Thanks a lot, Stefan. So it's not just a technology question. You need to put it in a bigger system, really, with the supporting legal framework and a carbon tax, really, I suppose. Let's have a question from our expert panel, Hans Auer.
Yeah, I have a question to Arild, and maybe then a related one to Odd. When thinking about regulations to facilitate the recycling of critical raw materials, so maybe we could think about similar policy instruments like the CO2 allowances and the ETCS market, because finally we need a price signal, and I agree with you that subsidies is not necessarily the best choice, that we simply might think about, let's say, allowances on raw materials we can have from global trade, and increasingly then increase the share of recycled materials we have to meet. And if we don't meet these quotas, we are penalized. So pending that, we think about similar instruments like that. And maybe a related question to Odd. Do there already exist global, let's say, trade models of minerals where we have, let's say, global clearing prices of a market, and then in a certain region like Europe, if we have increasing share of recycling and less demand, that this influences market prices or something like that? Or is this not developed so far?
Okay, Arild first and then maybe Odd.
I think it's, when it comes to regulations and the adoption of circular practices, I think in many cases we talk about two different things, because in some cases we would see that recycling and other types of circular economy practices are already profitable. But they still are reluctant to adopt them because there is this coordination problems where it's a high risk of making those investments. And in those cases, subsidizing doesn't necessarily work as well as if you are putting a deadline saying that after 1st of January 2026 you cannot do this anymore, then these things would...
So it just becomes mandatory.
Yeah, it becomes a market solution. So... but when it comes to climate technologies that we had talked about earlier today, then subsidizing works really, really well. And we can see that also from our research on how companies make profits, that when it comes to climate technologies and these kinds of things, it's definitely a premium for those who are first movers, while in circular economy, it's the other way around.
It's the other way around. Odd?
Yeah, so to address your question, maybe two things. So first, I think we are not there yet. What is really starting to be is models in which you are CRMs, and you don't, it's even not consensual. So if you look at IRENA, it says it's not going to jeopardize the transition. In my paper, we say it's going to jeopardize the transition if you forget about them. And recycling is only slightly appearing. So if you look at all this report in 2023, you have a small part that say, oh, recycling would be great, but not a lot of numbers and not a lot of simulation on that. I think it's coming.
Okay, let's have a question from Roli Aranya.
Hello, you hear me? Possibly a question to Maria. I'm glad you brought up environmental diplomacy, because in my mind, when I hear critical raw materials, and I also hear that there's scarce critical raw materials, and they're possibly not equally distributed among all the regions of the world. So my question is that how much are we moving towards regional self-sufficiency when it comes to critical raw materials, or are we looking at a partnership model of distribution of critical raw materials?
That's a very good question. Thank you so much. I see this, there are several megatrends affecting us right now. Perhaps the largest one is the fact that we're in an era of deglobalization, regionalization, and what we do in the regions matters more. And once again, if we look at the European Union, there is this whole talk about strategic autonomy and how we make ourselves less dependent or reduce risks of being overly dependent on too few suppliers of critical materials in order to build up new value chains, such as the green ones. So in terms of that, it's important to look at possibilities of how can we increase the supply of critical minerals and materials in the different regions to make sure that we are not overly dependent on suppliers which can hold back that. So, and this, I feel, is an important part of an honest discussion we need to have about what it really will take to make the green transition happen in the different regions. And that's really how the whole theme of possibility of seabed mineral extraction is a topic at all, is the fact that we're not extracting minerals on land, we're not building CCS or offshore wind or onshore wind because it's beautiful. It's because it's the part of the new developing green economy. And minerals, critical raw materials, whether we like it or not, regardless of what we feel about it. Based on the knowledge we have today, well, we need them. So it's all about how do we go about to make sure that our extraction of that is as sustainable as possible, because we have, as I mentioned, the triple planetary crisis with pollution, nature crisis, and climate crisis. And solving only one of them cannot undermine our possibilities to solving the others.
Which is kind of relevant to what you're saying. From a just transition enthusiast, that's quite a nice name to give yourself. How could circular economies and economic processes contribute to a just energy transition and bring value to vulnerable communities? And is that something we should be thinking about?
I love that question. What a beautiful question. Thank you for asking that. Well, if we look at from a bird's perspective on what circular economy is and how modern economies have developed, well, it's really a decoupling which needs to take place, going from linear, from increased productivity to reducing costs, to emitting CO2, to taking, to using ecosystem services, to using nature. Well, if you turn that around, it will mean that you will need to create more jobs in order to keep resources in the value chain. You need to reduce amount of extraction. And all of that is really a systemic change to how modern economies are functioning today. So that will also be, of course, an important component of making sure the transition is just.
Thank you, Maria. Anders Hammarström.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Stefan, Jana. Good perspectives coming from your side. I have a bit of a question related to the competencies, because one thing is the solutions that we're looking at towards the circular economy. Another thing is the competencies, and we've seen the German car industry basically transforming.
Anders, could you just speak up a little bit? I'm not sure
Surely
that
I can
Jana
go closer
and
to the
Stefan
mic.
can hear you. Yeah, just
okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. No worries. So I was wondering about competencies for the transition towards circular economy. So one thing is the solutions, but we also need the people with the right competencies. And the German car industry has been to a large transformation, going from producing fossil fuel vehicles now to electric vehicles, and also encompassing perspectives on the circular economy throughout your whole organization. So could you say a few words, perhaps Jana, and also know, Stefan, you have a lot of experience working with the German car industry, a bit about the changes you've seen to basically the competences you've had to build in your organizations to enable the transition that you're now in the middle of.
Jana, did you get the question?
I got the last part of that question, and I hope I answer right. So the clear answer is yes. So the technology again is there. So we proved that already. The technology is, developing as well. So our first car, the GLC, as the E version, so the EQC in that wording, in our wording basically, and then the cars that we bring up this year and next year, our new modular compact cars, there are already ways in worlds in between. So worlds in between of kilometer range, worlds in between of efficiency. So the technology and the is there, and the organization itself brings up those technologies. It's developing this technology, and of course is developing as well on a sustainable way. So our CO2 footprint for the new cars and life cycle perspective as well in materials and the resource consumption issues. So our target to use more recyclates, more share of recyclates and bio-based materials is in place and can be measured and can be tracked. So the organization itself, technology is there and is ready. It's about the customer behavior. It's about the infrastructure. It's about the thing around, the adoption in the market of that, basically for European markets, new way of moving forward.
Stefan Krinker?
Yeah, so your question was also about the competency. And from my perspective, and I worked also 20 years in the automobile industry and now changed to science, is yes, definitely we need more competences also in the car industry, also in terms of education and training of staff. So what we currently do from the university side, as well as from Fraunhofer, that we work very closely together with OEMs and also suppliers to train people, so to train engineers to bring two sides together, The one side is the engineering side, and the other side is the sustainability side. And we call that life cycle engineering, that we train really the people not only to develop the product, but also to use the instruments to steer and manage sustainability, that the products have a better performance in terms of their life cycle performance. So that's my short answer on your question.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I would just like to ask, and do a quick fire question really to everybody to try and bring this together. And that is, so what's missing here? It seems so obvious that this is something that should be embedded into our economic systems, and yet it seems to be pitifully small. Give me 1 or 2 or 3 maximum words as to what we can do to try and really crank this up. Maria Vartasarian.
Well, it's all about supply and demand, basic economy. We need to make it more profitable to do what we want more of, and to make it less profitable to do it the old school way. And the reason for why we have a plastic pollution issue is the fact that it's cheaper to produce new plastic than to reuse existing. So that's a shift we need to make.
Yeah, and that's a policy intervention
Yes.
then, isn't it? Arild.
I think that in Norway, there is a lack of public attention around. We have far more focus on climate challenges than resource challenges. And I think that this is also part of the reason why we are lagging behind, because we have.
It's not fashionable.
Yeah.
Odd.
So I think part of the solution is going to come spontaneously from the industry, but not all. So I think there is a need for valuation. That's a very economist answer, but a need for valuation of what is not accounted for by the markets.
Okay, so she's an optimist. Jana,
Sure.
what's missing in this? What would really help speed up these processes?
I think optimism and looking at the opportunities is missing. So not looking at the challenges, of course we need to handle this, but more looking at the opportunities and then just deliver.
Okay, thank you. Stefan Krinker, you have the final word.
Yeah, so also changing the rules, which means going for a life cycle-based European legislation. We have some aspects going on. I already mentioned the change of the European emission legislation to a life cycle-based legislation. And from that, we need more, combined with optimism looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stefan Krinker, Jana Kregenberg-Ring, Maria Vartasarian, Arild Asperlund, and lovely Professor Aude Pommeret from France. It's been a really interesting conversation. There's been a lot we haven't managed to discuss, but they're with us for the rest of today. So nab them in the next break. It's a very generous break, dear friends and colleagues. We're giving you a whole 45 minutes, and we'd like to resume at 15:45 for our final session, which is about tackling the tensions in the transition. So see you very soon.